everybody. This is T. Falcon Napier. Welcome to Circle of Brilliance. Today we are going to be focusing our attention on the adjective map and hopefully do a little bit of adjective mapping along the way. So I did send you guys over in the chat window a link to the illustration you see on the screen. I want to make sure I acquaint you with it so you know exactly what it is you're looking at. And I'm chatting it over to all of you again and again. When I put this call up on YouTube, I'll also include a link to this file in the YouTube description. So a couple of things to know about this handout. First of all, I know that as you look at it normal size, you go, how can anybody even look at that? This was designed to be something you would zoom in on to use. As I mentioned last time around, if you were to have a reason to print this thing out, like you need artwork on your wall or something, it needs to be printed out at about 3 feet by 3 feet, or it's not going to be physically large enough to be able to read those words. So we instead designed it as something you would zoom in on. And so, you know, however you like to zoom in, you can certainly do that. We also made this searchable. And so you can always use your little search feature in your PDF reader, put in a particular word just to see if it's there. And how we have used this historically is that if we're working with a client and the client mentions how they happen to be feeling, what they happen to be experiencing, and they're giving us an adjective, well, we can throw those adjectives into search and see where they are on the change grid based on the language they're using. Similarly, we can ask them, well, how would they like to feel instead? How would they prefer to describe themselves, describe their experience? And as they start giving us adjectives, we can start to do a little search around those to see where those might place you on the change grid. So there's lots of ways that you can use this. Now, when we first designed the adjective map, we had a goal, and that goal was that we wanted to actually build out a set of 10 adjectives that would occur in each one of these squares. So the change grid has 144 of these squares, so there'd be 1,440 adjectives, which I know sounds like a lot, but it's actually a small percentage of the adjectives available to us in English, at least. So we got plenty to pick from. We got ourselves up to about, I don't know, 900 and some odd. And then, you know, life went on and we haven't really returned to this project for a good long while now. But one of the things on my bucket list is to finish the adjective map. And so there's plenty here to work with, plenty to use, but you might even see that there's a few squares on the change grid that have nothing in them at all. So it tends to be on the in-grid side of things. But when that's the case, you'll just see the word pending. There you go. So right there at location 1,3, pending. Haven't come up with one. So I don't know what adjective would fit on the continuum between tragic and enjoyable, but there's something that would go in between there, between parasitical and encouraging. so there is this quest for adjectives that we don't have anything for at all, but yeah.
Could it be like indifferent, or is that somewhere else?
Well, we don't know. And see, that's where we get into the fun of things. So in the latest version of your PDF viewer, we can put in indifferent and just see, is that anywhere? And the answer is nope, that's no. Oh, no, there it is. That's at 2 and 1.
Okay.
So again, it ends up being highlighted. Now, by the way, all adjectives are under continuous reevaluation. So, you know, we might have discussion around it and say, well, we need to scoot that one over a little bit. I will point out to all of you that that moving something from here 2-1 to 2-2 is not a big move. So at a certain point, you kind of go like, well, are we really now just talking about our personal experience with adjectives and how we personally define them? And so there's a whole document that goes along with this that says that is the list of the adjectives and the definition we've chosen for that adjective, or how we happen to be evaluating that adjective. In fact, if I scroll way over here, hopefully you're not getting seasick as I'm doing this. Sometimes, I don't know if I can find one fast. Yeah, there we go. You'll see a number after the adjective. And so surly has two different definitions, and each definition plots someplace differently on the change grid. And so this would be the second definition of surly and where it would go. So there is a companion document that goes along with this. We did not find that document all that useful because most adjectives, we just look and at our superficial understanding or immediate interpretation of it, that seems to match just fine for people. So, but that was the goal, to always have, here is the adjective, here is the definition of the adjective, here is its location. And by the way, all adjectives, where you plunk them down somewhere, there's an address for this square on the change grid. And so the square that is bordered by 11, 6, 11, 7, 12, 7, and 12, 6. And by the way, just in case any of you need the most basic of basic reminders, the first number is your rating for ability, and the second number is your rating for challenge. So if you said, oh, my ability is an 11, and the challenge is a 6, that puts you there. And here's 11, 7, 12, 7, 12, 6. So this square that is bordered by or defined by those four coordinate pairs is the one we're looking at here: blaming, pragmatic, and surly. Now, we can't easily refer to, if someone said, where is blaming, we need to have an address for it. And so our convention is to use the coordinate pair immediately to the left of the word block as its address. So on the adjective map list, you would see that blaming is at 11.6. That doesn't mean the blaming occurs right at 11.6. We just needed to find some way to have an address for this particular block. And for reasons I could get into, that's when we had to choose the coordinate pair to the left. And now that I've said that, because I know that people pay attention to where their attention is, and now you're kind of curious as to why that is, it's all answered by 0, 0. So in order for me to identify this block, it was best to use the adjective or the coordinate pair to the left and let that pattern continue all the way across the change grid. And so if we, go away, stop being helpful. If we go all the way over here to the far out, good grief, outgrid side of things, you'll see where we have arrogant, autocratic, etc. Those are at coordinates 11, 11. There is no coordinate 12, 12 block that would put you outside of the change grid. So again, that's why we use the coordinate pair immediately to the left as the address for these adjectives. The last thing that map or the listing was designed to do is to also tell you what the adjective's impact zone is. So for example, if I said that at 8 and 9, you're going to find the adjectives assertive, brief, decisive, direct, and fast. Well, some of those adjectives we might say have a very small impact zone. And again, the best way to think about an impact zone is that if I dropped a bomb, how far away from the epicenter would I experience whatever that bomb's impact happens to be? And so sometimes the bomb is a single drop of rain hitting the sidewalk. This is a very small impact zone. And at the other extreme, you would have some sort of like a nuclear, bomb being dropped, which would impact everything for, miles upon miles upon miles around. And so similarly, the concept is that, well, maybe assertive doesn't have as broad or as wide of an impact zone, as big of an impact zone as brief might have or decisive might have. And so we also want to say, well, does this adjective have a first degree impact, which would be only these four coordinates might use that? Or might we say, no, it's second degree. You could even go out this far and still find some evidence of that particular adjective. And is it even possible to go the next ring out, third degree? So are there some things like, for example, we say this is the driver quadrant. And so that would mean that there should be some element of drive energy. So to be able to say, I feel driven, I feel some drive around this, that should hold true at every single location around here. And even if we go upgrade a little bit more and say, well, this is the driven expressive, there is still that little taste of drive that's coming into place. And in fact, because it's the secondary energy, we might even notice it even more so there. And so my whole point is that some adjectives have very broad or very large impact zones, and other adjectives have very tight impact zones. I can only hope, oh, I've got to stop moving things around. I can only hope that I particularly like this one, warmongering does not have a very large impact zone, that you got to be out here where things are pretty dysfunctional in order for that one to actually hold true. Okay, thoughts about anything I've just said there about adjective, the adjective map itself? You can all unmute and say something if you feel so inclined. Oh, lots of people have joined in. Let me make sure I've clicked on allow to talk, allow to talk, allow to talk. So hi, everybody. Y'all feel free to chime in. Yes.
No question.
Okay. All right. All right. So again, for those who've joined in, I am chatting over to everybody multiple times the link to the Dropbox location for this diagram. Okay. So with that, yeah, go right ahead.
Sorry to interrupt. I saw that I was on mute, but I saw that. I can't seem to figure out how to cut that, take a cut so that I can then paste it. I can't seem to get into it. I can't figure out how to cut and paste. Is there any way that you could send that to us in a different way?
Yeah, I can. I don't, are they clickable? Are you guys able to click?
Tell you how to do it if you, because I've had the same problem. So if you highlight the link and then you hit Control C, you can do it. If you're on a PC.
I'm on a PC.
Okay. Hit highlight the link.
Yeah, hit Control C.
Control C, and then copy it. It'll copy over to whatever you're trying to copy into.
That's very interesting. Thank you for discovering that, because I think that's the kind of thing. I mean, almost all of us on the call are Zoom users. And that means that that's an issue for all of us. If you're using Zoom, right now we're using Zoom webinar, not Zoom meeting. Zoom meeting might behave slightly differently, but we got to let the good folks at Zoom know that if you chat over a link, the link isn't easily clickable.
No, I can't. And it's giving me a select all. It's not giving me a copy.
You might be able to click, you can click it. It is clickable, but it's not copyable. So if you want to, like I use OneNote during the call.
Yeah.
Okay. That's what I'm not doing, because when I click it, it goes into, okay. Yeah, here it is. Here it is. Okay, I think I have it.
Some Zoom calls I can copy and chat, because it might not just be links. It might be somebody puts a title of a book or something in there, and
I have to sign in somewhere for it anyway. I'm not sure I can.
Yeah. Well, and again, we're using Zoom webinar, and for reasons I do not understand, I can't chat you guys a document. Now in Zoom meeting, you can chat documents hither and yon, no trouble whatsoever. But for whatever reasons, that piece of functionality is not included in Zoom webinar.
Okay.
Well, and it might be that's the difference, because there's some meetings I go into and I don't know if there's Zoom webinar or Zoom meeting, but I can copy anything out of the chat box, and other ones I can't copy.
Right.
Yeah. Well, I've sent them multiple requests now, just saying, like, look, it's a pretty basic sort of thing, and we know you can do it because we can do it in Zoom in Zoom meetings. So please.
Well, and I don't know if that's the distinction, because
I don't know
which program people are using.
Yeah, there you go. Okay, anywho, now one other thing I will point out to you guys about this particular document is that it isn't just the one page. Now, this first page you're looking at is the one that's very searchable and you can do things to it. But if we scrolled through this handout, oh wait, what am I doing? I guess I should click here. You go to the other pages in the handout, and I got to make it smaller so you can kind of at least see what I'm showing. What we did was we went in, zoomed in, and took some screenshots of the adjective map. So right now you're looking at the upgrade quadrant, the upgrade section, also known as the expressive. Maybe that is editable, I don't know, but all these additional pages are things that are a little bit more zoomed in. And we did that because we thought, you know, if you ever are sitting somewhere with a client or you wanted to give them this document, they're not going to be zooming in all and out on the giant one. They want something that's a little bit more readable at normal, you know, size of a piece of paper. And so that's what all these other pages are. It's just zooming in, taking a screenshot so you can kind of see what's going on there. Okay, so anyway, that's the handout. You guys are all welcome to have it. So now I got to go back to the first page to do what I got to do. All right, so now a couple of calls ago, we did say that even though we couldn't find one of these, oh, I wish you would just stop trying to help me. We couldn't find any map of humanity, nothing that was easily overlayable. We were able to find one feelings wheel that I think we all kind of went like, now that one's interesting. And so I think that's the one that I'd like for us to kind of zoom in on and work our way a little bit through the exercise of adjective mapping. And so with that, anyone have any other, I see someone's unmuted, but if you got any questions, you know, feel free to interrupt me. I need to breathe anyway. Okay. So with that, it was this diagram about it was one of the different feelings wheels we found. This particular one came from Nonviolent Communication by Marshall Rosenberg. He's graciously said we can duplicate it for personal use and for teaching nonviolent communication. So y'all should be able to communicate nonviolently. So we've just made that appropriate there. Graphics and Organization of Feelings and Needs Wheels by Brett Stein. So there you go. Hasn't been revised since 2011. There you go. All right, so now one of the things we found particularly interesting about this was that while it does not overlay easily on the change grid, we appreciated the opposites that it was showing. And so I'm just going to zoom in just to the ones in the center, just bring everyone up to speed. So they said, well, what is the opposite of proud? So this is proud. By the way, then they give you, I think it's like 13 or so adjectives you can kind of use. I don't think these are organized in any particular way. Perhaps they are. Well, we'll look deeper. Anyway, well, what's the opposite of proud? Well, we already know this from pride-based leadership and a lot of the other things we teach, that the opposite of pride is shame. But I like what they've put in parentheses here, that being proud is about self-acceptance. So just soak in that for just a second. So when I'm feeling proud, is it really a reflection of how I'm feeling about myself? Would you guys be in agreement with that? You like their little definition they've put there? It's a whole bunch of,
Yes.
thank
Yeah.
you. Thank you so much. I really do appreciate when people unmute and play. And the opposite of pride, we've always said, is shame. And again, in pride-based leadership, we talk about that specific leadership behaviors in particular is what the program is obviously built around. It's pride-based leadership. Some of those behaviors are all about awakening and sustaining feelings of pride in employees, and other behaviors awaken or sustain feelings of shame in employees. And so we have pride-based behaviors and shame-based behaviors. And so we've always had this kind of dimension included in our programming. And by the way, there's no such thing as a pride-based or shame-based manager. It's always about the behavior. And there's no such thing as pride-based and shame-based companies that we're looking at specific behaviors. That being said, we have never found any organization, any individual who is going to be 100% pride-based or shame-based. Everyone's on a continuum somewhere, but it's very behaviorally specific. Well, doesn't that lend itself very nicely to what we do on a change grid anyway, because everything about the change grid is situational. It is about specific behaviors and where they manifest. And so I should then be able to somehow or another say there's certain areas of the change grid where pride naturally lives. And where pride naturally lives, we should also find pride-based behaviors, behaviors that would again awaken and or sustain feelings of pride in whoever happens to be being plotted. Similarly, there will be areas on the change grid where shame lives, and shame expresses itself in a wide variety of ways. But those feelings of shame we're experiencing in certain spots of the change grid, we should also find shame-based behaviors that would occur in those particular areas. And I love this idea that they've defined being ashamed or shame as self-judgment. Now, I do have an issue with the use of judgment because this seems to apply that the only time one judges, the result of judgment is shame. Well, sometimes you get judged and you have something to be proud of. So if I really wanted to fix this, I would say it's about more negative self-judgment. Critical self, even critical, I could still critically self-judge and find myself in a very positive light. So I have issues with the word judgment seeming to be attached to shame. Do you guys resonate with that, agree with that?
Yeah, I think that's right. Yeah, because
Yeah.
judgment is a neutral term. It is a neutral term. It should,
Right.
we use it in a negative way, but it really is a neutral term, and it should be more explicit.
Yeah. To me, a judgment is an exercise of examining someone or something against a set of criteria
Yeah.
and saying, yeah, that works, or no, they missed, or whatever. Similarly, I don't know that the only time I am able to accept something myself, accept something, that the outcome is going to be pride. Well, what if I've done something that was socially inappropriate? Maybe accepting that as part of my behavior. I actually did that, but I don't feel good about it. Now that I've judged it, I go like, I don't feel good about it. So I go about self-acceptance could also be that I accept myself in the entirety. So am I supposed to be proud of all of my negative qualities as well? I mean, I don't want to go all the way to shame, but could I simply put myself in a state where I go like, well, that's something I should really be more sensitive to and, really work on. We talk about the difference in pride-based leadership between healthy shame and toxic shame. And healthy shame is more about those awarenesses that help us to correct our behavior. So if you upset somebody, you should be able to recognize you just upset somebody. So you can stop for a second and go, was that okay for me to do that? Should I behave differently moving forward? So when I think about embarrassment or something like that, I don't think that's toxic shame. I think that's shame that somehow or another can be useful to us as we go about developing social skills and things like that.
Isn't that the difference between shame and guilt?
Well, I like that. And in fact, maybe we would find guilt. Do they have guilt down here? Guilty. There you go. So guilty is one of the, I don't know what you had to do as an adjective to make it into this this second sort of ring as opposed to the third ring. Although they're going awkward is built out of being self-conscious and uncomfortable. Guilty is regretful and remorseful. Okay, so I see how they're arranged. So these are more general. These are a bit more specific. But yeah, So again, while I appreciate what's been put in parentheses as a way to help us understand the extremes in the dimension, I don't know that these are fully correct. So self-acceptance could include elements of shame. Self-judgment could also include elements of pride. But acceptance in general, I think, would resonate more with positive sorts of experiences, and
Well,
judgment, you know, I don't
what's
know about that one.
interesting is what's next door to those. If you look at peaceful, you see acceptance, and then angry,
Mhm.
judgment. So, I mean, that's where it gets confusing, I think.
Well, yeah, and I think it gets confusing there because they're going like, these are all just feelings when your needs are being met on the in the right hemisphere, and in the left hemisphere, it's when your needs are not being met. And I do kind of feel a sense of continuum as I move myself from, well, I'll ask you guys, do you think that pride leads to joy, leads to being intrigued, leads to being trusting, then loving, then peaceful? Does that feel like a continuum? Or does that just feel like, well, that's a nice visual arrangement of things, but I don't know what's changing, what's evolving that moves me from powerful to happy?
I don't know
I
if
don't
I would
know.
say they were causative for each other, but collectively
Yeah.
they might be they would be good adjectives for the state of someone whose needs are being met.
Yeah. And I think that that's about all that I am trying to, what do I say, establish from this diagram as being accurate, reliable, whatever. It's like, no, I agree. All these things on the right happen when you feel like your needs are being met, and the ones on the left when you're not being met. And then I'll add to it that this is the only one that's given us this idea about opposites. So, so I wonder if the arrangement is just because they said like, well, we want to start somewhere.
Mhm.
But I would suggest to all of you that if the far right side means that your needs are being met at the maximum possibility, at the extreme, I don't know that intrigued and trusting would go there. I would think that when my needs are actually being thoroughly met, that I'm more likely to find loving, maybe proud, etc. So that's what I'm just saying. I don't think there's a horizontal dimension that we're trying to plot to an axis, and just like I don't think there's a vertical one. I think this is just a really lovely and useful arrangement of the activities, but it does not constitute a plottable or an overlayable adjective map. Okay, so let's kind of look at these other opposites. And once we work our way around that, I want to start doing some actual plotting. So joyful. All right, joyful. Although, do you guys, am I the only one that doesn't think that that facial expression is all that joyful? He looks kind of disturbed, if you ask me. But nevertheless, we all experience joy in our own way. But joyful is about gain, and sadness is about loss. Hmm. Okay. I don't, I, you know, I'm joyful if I lose weight, but maybe it's more how I'm defining it. It's more about gaining health. And so I appreciate the words they've used to help us understand what this spectrum would be like, what this continuum ranges from being maximally joyful, opposite maximally sad, greatest degree of gain makes me increasingly joyful, the greater the degree of loss, the sadder I'm going to become. So the stronger the self-acceptance, the more proud I'm going to be, the more harsh my self-judgment, the more ashamed I'm going to be. Okay, I can connect with that. I can say, all right, I'm looking at some continuums here. Yeah. And again, you guys can all, half of you are unmuted now, so feel free to chime in. Um, I do like this next one, intrigued versus surprised. So surprise is you're caught off guard. Intrigued is you're very much engaged. And I thought, well, that's really very interesting. I wonder though, how often being surprised leads to being intrigued. So it might have initially caught me off guard, but now I'm fascinated. And I'm being pulled into this in a really big kind of way. And maybe as I'm being so attentive, I might start to notice things that I find rather surprising. So maybe as a result of being engrossed, I make some sort of discovery that was astonishing.
Mhm.
So yeah, so I don't really know how. So again, I said this when we first looked at this. I don't think this diagram was put together for PhD candidates,
No, but
right?
it look,
Diagram reminds me of models that I have created in my past,
Right, right.
where I have tried to make things fit.
Yeah,
And,
yeah. And we
and
want something to be approachable. We want something, yeah. Yes, David.
if you insert control in the center circle
Hmm.
and greater control to the right, upper right, loss of control to the left, the lower left, I mean,
Yes.
that seems to be, reflecting the change grid.
I think you're right, and we are, by the way. I mean, I'll give you guys the preview. I did figure out a way that this can map onto the change grid. So we'll be playing with that, but it's not perfect, but at least we can get a lot of it, like David just pointed out. Up and to the right, proud, joyful, intrigued. Those definitely are, my needs are being met, but that feels like a very different energy than trusting, loving, and peaceful. It's like these seem like these are almost more internal sort of states that are about internal sorts of stuff. I don't know if that's the right word, where proud and joyful and intrigued seem that something external is also happening.
It's true, but you wouldn't be trusting, loving, and peaceful when you're out of control.
Well, that certainly is true. And you'll see how that maps. Hopefully we'll be able to get this thing to map as we work our way around this. Oh, which reminded me, I needed to take one screenshot when I had this zoomed in. We're going to need to see just that centerpiece. Okay, so finishing our way going around. Trusting is about security, and being afraid is about being threatened. So is the opposite of fear trust? Is the opposite of trust fear? I can kind of build a case around that.
Intellectually, it sounds feasible.
Yeah, because I was thinking like, if I'm not trusting, I'm probably, I look over here, the first word that came to mind was suspicious of what's going on. So I may not feel threatened in that moment. In fact, they didn't even use threatened as one of these words here, but nevertheless, insecure, anxious, vulnerable, scared. Okay, is that the opposite of trusting? I could make that work. So I'm all right with that. Now, the next little pair of opposites is loving versus disgusted. So if I don't love you, do I find you disgusting? Because they said this is about attraction. I love something. Now, if it's something, then I can go, well, I can see the opposite. So for example, if we apply this to our food preferences, I don't know for each one of you, but I'm sure there are certain foods that other people might love that you find absolutely disgusting. And so I can kind of build a case when I'm looking at stuff like that. So whether it's about preferences in music, preferences in food, preferences in the kinds of movies, I've got a lot of friends who use the word hate. I rarely use the word hate. When they go like, oh, I just hate it. That always seems like that's an overly magnified emotion word. There's not all that much stuff that I actually truly hate. In fact, I'm having trouble thinking of one off the top of my head, but certainly to say I don't like it. But if I look at this, I go contempt, repulsive. And by the way, is apathy really an expression of disgust, uninterested and bored? I definitely feel those are part of being apathetic, but I don't really know that when I'm feeling apathetic, I'm disgusted. Thoughts about
Yeah.
that? Mm.
No, I don't see that.
No, because again, if we go back to the Greek on which the word is based, apathy is apathos, without passion.
Right.
So, all right, so I don't think that that's disgusted. And by the way, disgusted, dis, is bad in some sort of a way. And the moment you see gust, you're talking about someone's sense of taste, the gustatory system. So you find this repulsive, that you have some sort of a visceral, gut level, literally kind of a gut level sort of a response to it. So, so some of it sickened, nauseous. Um, okay, I get all that, but again, I don't think this diagram was put together for people that are scrutinizing words at the level we're doing right now. This seems to be more about, let's have a fun, approachable, engaging way to do this. So yeah, there's lots of people and things I don't love, but I don't find them disgusting either. Okay, and then the last one in the pair is angry versus peaceful. So angry being judgment. So then I go back here to, well, what's a shame? Self-judgment. So is angry judgment about external situations, external things? And ashamed is judgment about internal sorts of things? That might again give us a little bit more of that external versus internal. Like I'm angry about something outside of me. I'm disgusted by something outside of me. I am afraid of something outside of me. Where if I go opposite, these are more internal sorts of things. So that internal external thing might actually resonate here.
That actually resonates about angry versus ashamed. That makes sense.
Yeah, yeah. And I do kind of think like, well, is peace the absence of anger? I would say that when I'm at peace, I won't find anger, but I probably also won't find fear, and I won't find sadness, and I won't find shame. And so I kind of wonder about all these. But if I go like peaceful, I'm at peace because I've accepted things the way they are, and I'm angry because I'm judging things and finding them to be less than ideal. Yeah.
I wonder if their use of the terminology or the term judgment, when I think of like, when you make a value judgment, you're giving your own meaning to something of what you're
Yes.
valuing in the moment.
That's right. That's right.
So I'm wondering, is that their intent of the use of that word?
Yeah, and it would be interesting. I mean, because even just the name of their program, nonviolent communication, don't you feel compelled to look that up and kind of go like, what's that curriculum all about? Who's the audience that was kind of targeted towards? Is this for young people? Is this for organizations that are in sort of conflict? Nonviolent. Yeah, it's a big.
Not movement, but yeah, area of teaching, and I think they use it for a lot of different things.
Yeah, in
As
fact,
well, that's well known.
yeah, and we may very well find it something that's worth taking a deeper look at in the weeks to come, particularly since, as we said before, one of the reasons why we really want to be using this kind of insights about emotions on the change grid is because we're about to go into, well, we're already there, but it's just going to get even grander, dealing with people that are in heightened emotional states. And how do we find some way to heal that void? How do we find some way to bring people back together? I forget who I was listening said this, but they said that in some ways, we should all actually count our blessings that the COVID situation is reducing family gatherings, because this year's Thanksgiving table could be very, very heated. Certain topics come up. You go like, oh, no, maybe it's good we're not all getting together this year.
I agree.
Yeah.
I just Googled him.
Yeah.
On my cell phone.
Yeah.
Just Marshall Rosenberg, author of Nonviolent Communication and Speak Peace in the World of Conflict, founder of the Center for Nonviolent Communication, travels throughout the world, including such war-torn areas.
Oh.
That's what it felt like to me. Rwanda, Burundi, Nigeria, etc. So that's what he does. It's about war-torn conflict areas, and he must use this as a way to help people come to terms and communicate. So
Ah, well, I think that actually is going to be a very nice segue to the next little part of what I wanted to go over with you guys. I do believe this overlays on the change grid, but it does not overlay top to bottom, right to left. And so I'm going to bring the adjective map back in. The only thing I want you guys to look at is this up grid quadrant. So this is the expressive quadrant. So expressive, expressive, driven, expressive, etc. I'm going to see if I can bring that screenshot into play that I took, because I have a thought. And a great many of my thoughts are way off base, but this one I think might actually have some merit. So let's play with it and hope for the best. So I think these overlay on the upgrid quadrant. So when I go, well, anger is something that we do put at the upgrid danger zone, even though it also comes into play the outgrid danger zone. And I go peaceful. Well, where is peaceful on the change grid?
It's in the middle.
It's down here in the middle. So that I can kind of go like, all right, that continuum, does that work from harsh judging whatever's going on, being very far upgrid? And again, I know you can't easily read the words that are here, but you guys know enough about the primary and secondary energies to know what we're talking about here. So that kind of feels like that resonates a little bit with me. If I go to the next one, disgusted versus loving. Well, loving would put me more at the center of the change grid. Yeah, we agree with that, and maybe a little bit out grid, because now we're talking a little bit more about romantic love and attraction and that thing, because out here we have charming and suave, and here's friendly and popular, and somewhere I forget the coordinate pair, but we have smooth with extra O's in it. So yeah, the person can be smooth. So I can maybe that could overlay, in which case, if that's where loving is and has a bit of an attraction to it, then disgusted would be out here somewhere. So my ability to eat eggplant is really quite low, and the challenge of forcing me to eat a mouthful of eggplant is actually quite high. So I could kind of feel that I would feel quite disgusted. You put me in that situation, but the truth is that if, regardless of the situation, you put eggplant in front of me and I'm going to be disgusted. So it's just my thing. For Linda, it's sweet potatoes. She physically is incapable of eating sweet potato. And occasionally she will try, and she will put the teeny tiniest little morsel of sweet potato into her mouth. And what follows, this whole series and range of facial expressions tell a story that her body physically refuses to swallow whatever that is. And so, I get it. Where is that on the change grid? Well, she's trying to do something that she knows she has a low ability to do it. She's going to find it very challenging. And so I could kind of see where, at least in those simple food examples, disgust could be upgraded a little bit on the in-grid side of things.
T?
Yes, Edie.
Yeah, I think you can be disgusted at a behavior, but still love the person. I mean, I think there's a step. Yeah. And then the other thing with peace and anger, I think, so many of like Buddhism and the Eastern religions emphasize detachment. And I think it's often a detachment from things like anger, so they can come to a place of peace. And then going back to the joy thing, I've always looked at joy being an inner essence that is not dependent on outside events, where happiness is dependent. I'm happy if I win the lottery, but joy is a way of being, and that's based on perception. Because I mean, I lost everything, but I don't remember being without joy.
Yeah.
Because my focus was what I had. I had the water.
Right.
Yeah. So, and I also think that needs, as a therapist, there's no question in my mind, and working with visualization in cancer patients, Getting Well Again, an MD at MD Anderson, cancer oncologist, wrote a book, Getting Well Again. And the unconscious needs are not what the conscious needs are. So there again, what need fulfillment is may not be what unconsciously is lacking. Because he talks a lot about people dying because it brings you together, that people that you have unfinished business with or conflict, when you're dying, there's unity. So those are unconscious needs. So I just wanted to put that in that.
Oh, very interesting. Yeah, very, very interesting. Yeah. And something you said at the beginning was that it's possible to find certain aspects of something disgusting and find other aspects of it loving. And going back to a food example, for me, that would be coffee. I think coffee, it's one of the few things I hate. I think coffee is the most horrible tasting thing anyone ever discovered. And I'm baffled by why people actually like the taste of it. But the smell of it, I love the smell of coffee. But oh, I can't imagine why anyone would actually find that pleasant to drink.
Yeah, exactly.
All right, so I think we experience lots of things simultaneously. But again, what I'm just trying to do here is just throw this out there and say, sometimes in people's models, because they're so focused on a certain set of circumstances, they're looking at what will we discover inside of that set of circumstances. And I think when it comes to nonviolent communication, well, just the name of it implies that violence could be happening. Well, where on the change grid does violence live? Violence tends to live more, well, it lives in all, well, no, I'm going to ask as a question. Where does violence live on the change grid?
Up and out grid.
Up and out grid is the violence that the person might be directing to another person. Where do the people that are experiencing, receiving the violence tend to be on the
in grid and down grid.
in grid, some down grid, right? Again, because we go like when the moment someone starts talking about violence or a violent environment, I go into, well, what are the 4 different ways we can cope with in a life or death situation? So fight, flight, freeze, and fade. We've got our 4 F's. And so I kind of go like, well, violence can occur at any of these danger zones. But as David pointed out, a lot of violence is outgrid, but that's the violence from the perpetrator's perspective. So someone is committing the act of violence. And I would say that being outgrid is deliberate violence, where upgrid seems to be more like reactive violence. I'll throw that out there because again, the person's in a situation they're like, I have no ability to handle this life and death situation. And so I'm going to hit you with whatever the first thing is I find. It's not like I was able to plan anything. I mean, wars are out grid. Being caught off guard or whatever is more upgrid. And by the way, before we want to make all the in-grid people perfectly innocent, remember that very often in the evolution of the victim perpetrator drama, that today's victims become tomorrow's abusers. And that cycle continues. And so they didn't go through the middle of power on the way. I want to point out to everybody, they never visited the interior of the change grid. They moved from one danger zone immediately to the next, to the next, to the next.
That cylindrical nature of
passive-aggressive,
the change grid?
Yeah, well, go ahead, David first, yes?
I was just going to say, isn't that the cylindrical nature of the change grid?
Both the cylindrical and the spherical representations of the change grid. So certainly going as far as the cylindrical part, the highest point of apathy is the lowest point of stress. So the cylinder definitely depicts what you've just described. And I guess if I put the cylinder vertical, then the out grid and the in grid could come together. And again, if I print the whole thing out onto a piece of fabric and drape it onto a ball, all 4 of the danger zones can now meet one another at the South Pole of wherever that happens to be. So you're absolutely right. They're on the dark side of the change grid. They're on the dark side of the moon, if we want to look at the spherical representation of what's going on.
Well,
What about suicide? That's violence against oneself. Would that be down grid?
Well, I think it's definitely on the dark side of the change grid, because it may very well be that I have to go like, what was the whole process that led to someone's choosing to commit suicide? Well, maybe it came out of depression and sadness and being, gloomy and dull and despondent and all that. But then I think about how historically sometimes suicide is an act of honor. So if we look at some of the ways that certainly a lot of Asian cultures, stories
Yeah.
talk about people with harikari or harikiri or whatever, however you
You,
actually would.
and one of the psychiatrists from like 40 years ago, I remember saying it's the ultimate act of anger, that in one simple stroke, you wipe out everybody. And it can be a place coming from anger as well.
It
You get
could.
back at everyone. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And so that's more the upgrade. Where I go like the upgrade, I think that anyone who attempts suicide in their upgrade, if they die, it was accidental. Their goal was to get attention. So, you know, they just wanted to make it bad enough or whatever. So again, that's the difference between the expressive energy leading to suicide versus the driven driver energy leading to it, the analytical. In fact, when we travel, I love going to famous homes of barons of industry and all that. And we went on a tour of the George Eastman House in Rochester, New York. Have any of you ever gone to that house?
No.
So
Familiar.
George Eastman is the person who created the Kodak camera. And if you went to his house was absolutely amazing. It really was a testament to everything this guy had thought of and created. In fact, one fun quick story is that in the exact center of the house, there is the music room. And he had a pipe organ that he'd put into this music room. And when the house was all done, he sits down, he plays the organ, and his immediate response, not even a minute into playing it, is that the acoustics of this room are off. And he disappeared into his study and made out all these maps about acoustics and all this sort of thing, and realized that that room needed to be something like 6 inches longer. And he actually paid to have his house split in half and moved a handful of inches in order to correct the acoustics in that room.
Wow.
So yeah, genius and madness are very, very close neighbors. Well, he committed suicide. I forget what age, 70 some odd years old. And he basically said he had accomplished everything he set out to accomplish in his life. And so there was no reason for him to continue on this physical plane. And he committed suicide. You're just going to go like, really? So there's got to be some underlying pathology that was going on. But again, obviously the man, and they just say, look, he was really eccentric. And so how does eccentricity lead you to terminating your life? Is that an upgrid, an outgrid, a downgrid, an ingrid sort of a place?
Where does eccentricity live?
Where does eccentricity live? Great question, Jeff. And so you guys tell me, where do you think eccentricity lives? How would you
That is
care?
upgrade because it's expressive in some way.
It is expressive, but when I think about someone who's an eccentric, give me other adjectives to describe an eccentric person.
Unique.
They're unique. Yep. What else?
Odd.
Okay. Yeah. Good.
Different.
Yeah.
Analytical.
Smart.
They're smart. And so if I zoom in, I got to switch screens a little bit here.
I think that would be more like power apathy somewhere in there.
Yeah. So if I said maybe they're an expressive analytical is where we start to find that kind of thing, because usually someone who is truly eccentric, they have some passion that they are following. They tend to be very detail-oriented, concrete, creative, imaginative, logical, reserved, complex, original. I feel like I'm in this general vicinity energetically of what's going on. So eccentricity goes there. And by the way, to really be an eccentric, you generally have to have resources available to you.
Yeah.
Mhm.
I mean, the average person can't afford to be eccentric. They need to be practical about
Right.
what's going on.
But
And
Just
so,
but
say
see,
that
we
honest
often call
and
these
you can be
people
eccentric inside
schizophrenic.
of your own.
We label these people in the DSM-5 and so forth.
well, and they may
You know,
very well belong there. I mean, if I
as
really,
they
if I
might.
looked at,
Yeah.
if I looked at the full range of diagnoses from DSM, whatever number they're up to by now,
Yeah. Yeah.
I can tell you right now that every one of those diagnoses equals an adjective. And we can
Mhm.
plot it someplace on the change grid. So I could say that certainly if you want to say, well, someone is a maniac.
Mhm.
All right, well, where does mania live on the change grid? That's
Mhm.
more of it's an expressive sign way of exhibiting. So, and if we look at, well, what about the hardcore depressive? Where are they on the grid? Or where is the person who self-harms?
What about
Mhm.
passive aggressive?
Passive aggressive, when I look at passive aggressive, I go, this is someone who does not want to do something so overt that they are immediately recognized as the culprit. You know, they're obvious in their behavior. That's not someone who's passive aggressive. Passive
Mhm.
aggressive people are under the radar.
They're in grid. Yeah,
I
somewhere.
think they're more in grid, perhaps more down grid, because being a good passive aggressive, you have to have figured something out. So is
Something
passive
cooking.
aggressive? Yeah.
Passive aggressive is clever. They know how to.
They gotta be clever, and they have to be clever enough to not only do whatever it is they set out to do, but to not really be noticed
Mhm.
about what's going on. So again, to Edie's point, DSM-3, wouldn't that be a fun series of calls and just say, let's take the whole list of
Oh, yeah.
diagnoses and put together a map of weirdness. And
Well,
No judgment.
no judgment being made.
speaking of
You-
that, I don't
Yeah.
know whether you've watched that series on Netflix, Mindhunter, but it's about
Mhm.
the FBI agents that developed profiling.
Yeah.
And so if you talk about the serial killers, you know, they're very cold and calculating when they they have all these rituals and very
Yeah.
calculating and precise ways that they work. So I think the change grid would be really fascinating for those guys, those FBI profilers to.
Absolutely. And wouldn't you hope that they've already created a map of some sort?
Well,
That
they have.
they
I
would,
mean, that's the whole profiling is a whole science
yeah,
now.
I'd love to see what their map of humanity looks like. Now, obviously, they're focusing more on the unhealthy way that human behavior expresses itself. So, but if I go like, okay, where does the serial killer live? They live down grid and out grid. So, because look here, clever, deliberate, exacting, logical, methodical, organized, and right next to it, hostile, incisive, resentful, sarcastic, blaming, antagonistic, critical, grumpy, precise. Look at all those words traveling as a set. And you have that very driven analytical, that very analytical driver. And another layer of the change grid, this is also the wedge. If you see these gray diagonal lines, that divides the change grid into 8 wedges. That particular wedge is all about the reformer. So the reformer is trying to say, errors have been committed. We can correct these errors if we do something that is insightful, et cetera, et cetera. So Thanos in which movie was that? The not Avengers, whatever Marvel movie it was. He was
The
just going like,
Avengers.
yeah, we need to wipe out half of the population, and then we can rebuild, we can fix things. And so I think a lot of that megalomaniacal sorts of behavior is going to be here on the change grid, not outgrid danger zone. Because the outgrid person that's a driven driver in the outgrid danger zone, they're pushing too hard, too fast. They're not being thoughtful about what's going on. They're just acting out in very bossy, controlling sorts of ways. But that mastermind, that evil mastermind, we know has to have a very strong analytical component, but that analysis is being directed towards something. And look, blaming, pragmatic, all these things. This is a good villain. If we're, and then I want to go like, where does my hero live? If this is the villain, where's the hero? So
You
yeah,
know, T,
yeah.
I just want to say one more thing about passive aggressive. I think it's very cultural, and it's a cultural override. Living in New York City, I've never met a passive aggressive person there. Living in North Carolina, although it's 70% not South anymore. But when I first moved here, my Southern friends, I hate to say this, tend to be more passive aggressive.
Oh, absolutely. No, in
Yeah,
fact,
so I think the culture is a lot to do with it. Yeah. Okay.
that's one of the biggest jokes, because in that area, we got some people that are phoning in from international locations. So in that particular area of the country, the southeastern part of the country, one of
Yeah.
the things that they get away with routinely is they can say the most horrible thing about another person as long as they precede it or follow it with the words, bless his or her heart. So she is the trashiest woman on this planet, bless her heart. So there is this kind of passive aggressive stuff. But my favorite example of passive aggressive behavior comes from the movie My Big Fat Greek Wedding. Do you guys remember that one? And the father is always kind of go, I'm the head of the household, I'm the head of the household. And the gal's mother, Nia Varda, whatever her last name is, says to her, he might be the head, but the woman is the neck. And the neck decides where the head goes. And I thought, isn't that perfect? Isn't that perfect?
Yeah.
So, okay, anywho, our time is up for today. So when we get back together next week, I do want to continue this little go around of this, because I believe that it feels like it plots overlaying the up-grid quadrant, which would make sense about that whole nonviolent communication. But some of it I also think starts to stretch into the out-grid quadrant. Or maybe, just maybe, if you guys will allow this set of 12 to tumble, maybe if I rotate this, I can move it into each of the 4 quadrants. And based on a certain rotation, I can still get it to fit. Yes. All right. So yeah, we'll have a little bit of fun with that, but welcome to the world of adjective. Sooner or later, what I want to do, by the way, there's about 160 adjectives on this little diagram we're looking at to the right. It might be nice to say, well, let's take a few and see where they actually plot. See where they go. Okay. All right. So with that, thank you all very much for joining in. Have a very spooktacular Halloween, and we will chat again on Election Day. Yay. Okay. Bye, everybody. Take care. Bye for now.
Bye.